Karen Trout. I am, there we go. I am the community engagement librarian here at Kalamazoo Public Library. And it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this panel presentation on being Asian or Asian American in Kalamazoo. In case you don't know why we're presenting a program on this topic, it all has to do with our Reading Together book this year, which is The Best We Could Do by T. Bui. And we've been having several programs around the themes of this book, this being the last one before the author actually gives an online presentation next week, March 22nd. And you're all encouraged to attend that online program as well by doing just what you did tonight. Go to KPL Live and you'll be able to find that. It will be live streamed and it will also be available for viewing afterwards. So if you can't do it on Tuesday night, but you want to be sure to watch it, you will be able to do that. So again, thank you so much for coming. Let me get some other people in here before I introduce Jen Hamos. Jen is moderating the panel presentation tonight, and she will introduce the other participants. I'm going to disappear and go off camera, but if anyone has any tech issues, you can use the chat to send a to send a message to me, and hopefully we'll just sail right through this. Thanks very much. Jen, I take it over.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us on such a beautiful day. We appreciate that. Today we are, I'll do a little bit of an intro of our work with Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Kalamazoo, and then we'll introduce our participants tonight, and then we'll get into some questions. Throughout, if there's anything that you would like to ask, please put it into the chat, and we'll be moderating that as well. So our Asian and Asian American members of the Asian American and Pacific Islander, the AAPI Affinity Group from Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Kalamazoo, we're just 3 members of this group. TRHT Kalamazoo is a comprehensive national and community-based process developed by the WK Kellogg Foundation to identify and address the historic and contemporary effects of racism. If you identify as Asian or Asian American and you're like, oh, what is this affinity group? I'm really curious, and you want to be connected to the affinity group, you can reach out to Sarah Lee, who will introduce herself shortly. I'll put her email in the chat here. And you'll be added to our list, and we'll be in touch with some upcoming events that we have for the summer. Before I get into what else we're doing today, I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues and friends for an introduction. I can start. My name is Jen Hamos, she, her pronouns, and I am the Vice President of Initiatives and Public Policy at the Kalamazoo Community Foundation. I'll pass it to Sarah.
Thanks, Jen. I'm Sarah Lee. I go by she, her pronouns as well. I am currently the Director of Marketing Communications at the Kalamazoo Community Foundation. And I'll pass it over to Shawan.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Jen. My name is Shawan. I'm calling from also my beautiful cozy home in Portage. Been here for 10 years now with the Fetzer Institute. I'm a senior program officer, and I lead the education portfolio in our foundation. It's a pleasure to be in front of you tonight. Thank you.
So tonight's panel really serves as a conversation between colleagues and community members who I also consider friends. Before we share our stories, I wanted to name that Asian American and Pacific Islander communities are often lumped together as a monolithic group. So there's Asian American label, which is really used as a catch-all. There's East Asian, which is also ambiguous. And I want to be clear that the diversity within AAPI heritage and experience is too vast to simplify under a simple label. No 2 cultures are the same, and no 2 experiences are the same. We invite everyone here tonight to listen to our unique experiences and personal histories, understanding that these are ours, and we're inviting you in a sacred space to listen. So I'll start with our first question. And this came from one of our Affinity Group's activities. We had a healing retreat in December, and I just really appreciated the wording of this question. So the question is, who are you and whose are you and to whom do you belong?
Yeah, so what's in front of you, it's a combination of a blessing from my grandparents, and it's a protection and all the good love and effort from my parents. I'm lucky enough to be spending time almost equally now, my first 20 or so years in China, Southern China, a very small village in Southern China, extremely poor when I grew up. I barely had shoes on, probably until I was fourth grade. And somehow always dreamed to come to the United States, probably because of the novel and the reading that I read, the seeds about beautiful notion or ideals of democracy, freedom, and compassionate love brought me here. Then I've been in the US for a good 20 years. Think about that. So 20 years China, 20 years in the United States. I call both my homes. And so, yeah, sounds like a known journey heading west. And then I just know I'm not alone. My grandparents who blessed me with my name, happy to share more. Then my parents gave me life. Then I formed my own little family in the United States, my beautiful wife, my two little ones. I'm not alone. So kind of answer the question to whom that I belong and whose am I? I'm once again a connection of blessing and love. And then I will finish my little introduction here. I've been here in Kalamazoo for a good 11 years. I have enough blessing and also care from local Kalamazoo, a place where defined by generosity. And I try to join the good effort of compassion. That's why I joined this Asian American Affinity Group, because that I feel this is where I can play an appropriate role to serve the community by just showing up, who am I, the best I can. Sarah, you want to go next?
Gosh, it's so hard to follow Xiaowan's lead. But yeah, no, who are you, whose are you, and whom you belong to? Love these questions because they build on each other, and I'll take them in sequence. Who am I? I am, first and foremost, you already know my name, Sarah Lee. I'm a Chinese Malaysian immigrant, and I come from a small family. I think it's small. I have my mother, my father. My father passed away 2 years ago during the pandemic. I have two older siblings. I'm the youngest. My older sister, older brother, and also my mom are still in Malaysia. And whose are you? Well, I'm currently married to my husband, Chance, who's also on this screen here. If you see his name, that's him. And I belong to him and his family, who are all here in Kalamazoo. Some of the cool things I guess I would highlight about my ancestors would be they come from explorers and travelers. And some might describe them as pioneers as well. Why? It's because they were constantly moving and seeking a better life for their family and economic opportunity as well. So my family originally came from southern China, and there's different roots that tie back into it. So 23andMe is a blessing where I got to learn a lot about that. But they moved to Malaysia for a greater economic opportunity. In fact, my great-grandfather started a shop there, and they moved throughout Malaysia to just build a different life. So there's 3 generations of my family there, and I'm the first here who moved to America permanently to build a different life and pursue a different type of economic opportunity. Also want to acknowledge another fellow Malaysian in the audience here today. So hi there. All right, Jen, I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, I also really like this question. When I think about who I am, so I am biracial. My dad is white and my mom is Filipino. She's from a northern mountain province in the Philippines called the Tadian province. She came here to marry my dad. And that, you know, that's where I came out of. That's who I am in that way. I really see Kalamazoo as my home, is where I came of age, and I really see myself as a Kalamazoo person. And so I claim Kalamazoo as my home, and I know that a lot of folks say like, "Hey, you're a Kalamazoo girl," and that's really cool to feel that way about a community. I also have two children. They are 5 and 2, so we're in the throes of early childhood right now. My husband is a musician, and we've built our family here. The rest of my family who is living are in the Philippines, outside of my immediate family that my parents started here in Michigan. I've never been there or been able to meet them. And that's something that I would really like to do in the future, and something I talk about quite a bit. I really find the story of Shawan's name so special. And so before I get into my next question, Shawan, can you share the story of your name? Because I love it so much.
Thank you, Jen. Watching me do this. So my English name on the screen is Sean, S-E-A-N, because I just love Sean Connery, wish like to be like Sean Connery, somebody aging so beautifully or never ages. However, in the sake of doing an exercise right in front of you real time, I'm changing my name, changing back to my Chinese name, which is Xiaoan, Xiaoan. If you wanna listen to the authentic Chinese version, because it is important, it's meaningful. I mentioned about I was a blessing from my grandparents. So Xiao, yeah, quite a story. You have to bear with me, I guess. 30 plus years ago, I was born in the hour before sunrise. I think it was like around 5 o'clock, and there was no such a thing that to deliver a child in a hospital, not at all. It's a very poor village. My mom was all by herself during that hour, and she single-handedly delivered me without any other help, because my father was teaching in different parts of the county. No, it's just, I think it's like 100 miles away. Then my grandpa, who went through a whole lot in his life, passed away when he was 90. But anyway, he gave me the name Xiao to honor the hour I was born, which is before sunrise. Then An means peace and tranquility. So when I was 7, I was always kind of enjoyed reading. So I was old enough to ask a question. I'm glad I did, because my grandpa passed away when I was 7, the only grandparents I get to live with. Then I say, how do you expect a young boy like myself, born in a pure darkness, to have a peace in mind? That was pretty decent and profound question. I'm proud of myself. Then my grandpa, and who went through a lot, once again, in the communist regime, and then almost died 4 times during his lifetime, and say, Sharon, there will be a whole life ahead of you. You will surely go through moments of disparity, loneliness, and fear. But always believe the sun will rise. Just give you enough hope to get through what you're going through right now. So it's a name, it seemed very paradoxical, but working together nicely for my 40 or so years. And that has just, over and over again, give me the hope, give me the love. No matter whatever that we are going through, the sun will always rise. So Jen, I'm glad you, once again, for this opportunity for me to share that. So it is indeed a blessing. And I always I trust that my grandpa is watching over me because of that conversation.
Thank you so much, Shawan. Because this book is a graphic novel, we wanted to do a little show and tell and do something we call the sacred bag activity. And I'll start with you, Sarah. Sarah's so good at having like so many things to show. And we're going to look at 3 things. So we'll start with the first one for each of us. And I'll start with you, Sarah. Something that shows the culture that you were raised in.
Oh goodness, I I lived in Kalamazoo for almost 18 years, so everything that I have from Malaysia is with me now. So one of the things I brought for show and tell during our healing retreat, I'm bringing it to here today as well. So I've collected all these little trinkets when I was little, and everything in here. So first and foremost, here's the container. If anyone's familiar with this box, this used to be a storage container for a SIM card if you use cell phones. So growing up, cell phones were a big deal, more specifically when I was a teenager. But in there, I found all these little goodies from my childhood, including my very first toy, which doesn't work right now, I think because it's missing a battery or something's up with it. But it used to play a little music to play me to sleep, and little things to my very first keychain that my mother gave to me. I still have it. It has my inscription, my name, and she says, "To my daughter with love from Mama." You know, I still have all these little things from my childhood, including my teenage years where I was a prefect. My name tag's still in here. So I have all these little things in here that represents the culture I was raised. And a lot of it is from things from music. I grew up learning a lot of different instruments, from violin to piano to everything you can think of in the band. I've played them all at one point. And then just being by the ocean, I have things with like cool little seashells, because Malaysia is surrounded by oceans and bodies of water. We used to go to the ocean very often for like trips and little random things. So anyway, this is my show and tell. I know you can't really see it, but it's all these little things, including like tickets to shows, the very first stadium that we had in Malaysia. And we had the Chorus, if anyone's familiar with the Chorus, in the Irish band. So that was my childhood growing up, and that was the culture I was raised. It's very much a mix of things that were related to the Malaysian culture scene, to my parents' heritage of being Chinese, and also the influences of Western culture in that country.
Thank you, Sarah. Shawan, what is your item that shows the culture that you were raised in?
Thank you. Sarah, love all those stories again. Thank you for that. Just also a few items. I guess I'm old enough in my mid-40s to believe whoever that show up in my life, or even whatever item that I put my hands on at any given moment, there for a reason. So then in preparation for this time with you guys, I was kind of, what kind of item should I? Then I came across, this is one nice picture of my parents. And so they actually came to visit us to help us with raising my very first child, David, who's 14. Look at David right in the middle. So that was Christmas 2007, when David was like 3 months old. I'm sharing this one is because I miss my parents like crazy right now. My father passed exactly 10 years ago to a car accident in China. Because of the long distance, I couldn't even make it to his final moment. So I always put this picture right next to my desk table so I can look at them. Then my mom, who's 82, because of COVID, I cannot pay a visit for 2 years already. I know how much she misses me. In China, she practiced Buddhism, and she worshiped Goddess of Mercy, Guan Yin. And then in our very humble, tiny apartment in the hometown, I know my mom would put the statue of the Goddess of Mercy the center of the living room. My mom, at every lunar calendar month, the 1st and the 15th, my mom would kneel down, light up incense and a candle, and pray. In her prayers, most of the time, she would pray for the health and well-being of myself and my core family in the United States. That's just what a mother's love and what she does every. So this means a whole lot about when I started introducing, I'm a blessing, I'm a protection of my parents. And no matter, even though I'm 40 plus years old, I'm always the youngest and the favorite son. So that's a nice one. Another item, I don't know if I answer your question nicely, Jan. When you say the culture I'm raised in, culture I'm living now, the culture I want my kids to raise their children, they all mingle, intertwine with each other. Yeah, one way or another, I do as a parent of two children, I like to introduce how I was raised to my children, and therefore they can do their part. Life has not been easy for the past 2 years, just to be more specific. In COVID, my own surgery, and I lost a fairly good amount of friends and family members, both in China and the United States, just in the past 2 years alone. Then I had to exercise the introduction of my grandpa to say, don't fear, because the sun will always rise. That has been helping me, like I just introduced. Then also a nice ritual. This is a Tibetan singing bowl, a bowl that I actually got from Tibet. It's a singing bowl, it's a ritual, it's a tool in a practice where when people meditate, when people sing together, it's believed to be a spiritual tool and a ritual, and whoever practices that can actually go into a different realm. I'm gonna play it, if you can hear. The sound travels. The sound travels just like how my mom's prayer come across the ocean, have that magical power on me, bringing me the peace and the safety that I needed. I do the same. I pray and have prayers for all people that I care about. So I think this singing bowl is really giving me more than that I think every day just to get by. I think we all need it. Jen, thank you.
Thank you. I also have a picture to show the culture that I was raised in, and I don't know if folks can see it, but I was a child of the 80s. And so you can see here, I still have the gold frame from the 80s as well. But yeah, the culture I was raised in, you can see there was, our Filipino culture and whatever we could honor of that in our home. And then there was white culture as well. So you have like, we had traditional Filipino dress for our Filipino events, but we mostly, this was church clothes, right? So it's kind of stuck between two worlds, especially, and you can see here with my siblings, we all look very ethnically ambiguous. So it was a lot of just being like, not feeling fully Filipino, not feeling fully white, and like struggling with that from the time I was little, just thinking about what that meant and how we were raised. Although we participated in cultural celebrations and it was just part of who we were because of how we looked and our own identity. I think that was something that was kind of difficult sometimes when it came to the culture that I was raised in. And just going to the culture that I'm living in now, and I appreciate what you said, Shawan, about the last 2 years and how difficult it has been, because it's been difficult for everyone in so many ways. I lost my grandmother, my Lola, in the Philippines during COVID, and thanks to things like Facebook Live, I was able to just participate in some way in honoring her, but there was no way for us to go back because we couldn't travel at the time when it happened. And and thinking about what I'm living in now, and then I'll pass it to you, Sarah. I have this dog-eared copy. Like I said, I have two sons, Henry and Hugo. They're 5 and 2. And what I'm living in now, this is called Cora Cooks Pancit. And it's about, I hope it's at the KPL. I hope it's in the library, but it's about a girl cooking Filipino food with her family. And I read it to my sons because it's something that I did quite a bit with my mom. And I want them to know all the food and know what it feels like to have the honor of like cooking with your mom, and just build that into the culture that we live in now. So we read it quite a bit, and it's a lovely book, and I love it. And Sarah, I wanted to pass it to you to talk about the culture that you're living in now.
Yeah, no, I love that you mentioned food, Jen. You know, I feel like most Asian cultures have something to do with food and the joy and celebration that comes with it. So the culture I'm living in right now, I married a local boy here in Kalamazoo. As I've mentioned earlier, he is white, and his family's traditions are around a lot of family dinners together. And one of the traditions I've picked up is China. For those who know China, collecting China all the time and bring out the good China for dinner. This is show and tell. This is actually my husband's family. So on his father's side, China that we've inherited now, but also have used it as ways to continue on the tradition of hosting family gatherings, or whether it's with friends, but just having good food and great conversation. That's kind of like our culture of how we want to build community together. And it's a blending of two different cultures. One is of mine growing up in Malaysia and being Chinese Malaysian, and also my husband who grew up in America. It's often a clash of cultures from time to time, but we're learning to appreciate one another's differences. And we've been married for 14 years now, and I've lived here in Kalamazoo for 18 years. So it's been a journey together and learning and embracing one another. And I love them. They're great. I love that they embraced me the moment I came into the family. Not all of us are so fortunate to say, "Ooh, in-laws," but no, I feel very fortunate to be part of this family. And did you want me to do the last question as well? The culture you were.
Yeah, and I was going to say, what's the culture that you want to, like, because you're talking about your family and your marriage and your in-laws, what's the culture that you want to carry on through family and friends and through generations? Like, what do you want to make sure is like coming through in the future?
I have more show and tell. So one of the things I love about growing up, you saw my little knickknacks of like things in here, and this is all because of my family. We believe in just collecting different treasures and just part of our exploration, like things to remember. And one of the things my dad gave me before he passed and before I came to America was these lanterns. And if you're familiar with these are paper lanterns, and I'll open them up. Let me pull one that's bright and colorful. So this one's pink. They're hand painted. And this is usually put up during the 15th day of Lunar New Year celebration. So my future, generations and what I want to continue sharing with people is that sense of light and joy and celebration. So funny, I still have not used these lanterns because they mean so much to me. I cannot find any of them here in Kalamazoo, so I keep them here. And then there's also a set of candles. They're colored candles. They're meant to go in the middle. If you see this middle part here, that's where it's supposed to go. And then you're supposed to hang it up. But it's such a beautiful sight. I wish I could draw memories and show you right on the screen right now what that looks like and share that same feeling. But every time I hold these up and talk about them, I start to cry because, one, I miss my dad so much. He passed away 2 years ago during the pandemic. And he was the one who inspired joy and light for me to explore what fun looks like, part of celebrating these traditions. But more importantly, I don't know, that sense of play was huge, that sense of fun. And he was always that person for me. I was telling Chauncey the other day a story about my dad when we were living in America, because he used to work for an American company called NCR. And I was like 3 or 4 years old, and there's this beautiful field where they play baseball, but there was prairie dogs in the field, and I didn't understand what prairie dogs were. They were like these things that would just like pop out of the hole. So he thought they were going to catch you and eat you. So I start running out of fear because they were going to eat me. I'm this little kid like running around. But anyway, that was my dad. My dad loved to tease me. My husband today loves to tease me all the time as well. But it just reminds me of just some of the traditions I want to continue, not so much of the teasing part, but more of just the fun and play.
Thank you,
Thanks, John.
Sarah. Thank you. And Shawan, you're a father, and you have 2 kids. And what culture do you want your kids to raise their kids in? And what are you hoping for in future generations?
2 quick items. The first one is this candle. I remember when I was little, because the village was so just, of course, poverty defines us. There's no electricity all the way until 1999. And also no modern street or kind of transportation until probably 2001. So everything was on feet, and I have to climb up mountains and pure darkness in the evening. Then people get by having light up candles. It's just always means something, I guess, goes along with the theme of hope. My mom, I mentioned she would light up the candle and the incense in her prayers. And I tend to do the same. So I really want my children to carry this sense of hope. The hope is grounded. It's not a naive sense of hope, but rather the hope comes in knowing that they have the family on the back. They have the grandparents' blessing always there for them. Also have the way to trust the decency that is a deep light in each and every one of us, that we care for each other. So even that the world has become so sophisticated, and in this case, very complex, but that sense of groundedness, centeredness. I do also have to show, since the show and tell, Jen, and this, I don't know if you can see the whole thing. This is a baby clothing. It's handmade by my mom. If you can see, so this is where, when the baby was just born, and then you put the leg into this, and this would cover the tummy very nicely. You can tell this is a red color, which is a Chinese red, surprise, Chinese red. Then you have the 4 characters, 长命百岁, that means longevity. Then you have this, the symbol of the little rats. They are the 12 zodiac sign and begins with the year of rat. So what I really want my children to have is something like this, is longevity, a life with quantity, and the sense of warmth under the protection that is from grandparents and the parents. You can probably tell I'm reading very much a family guy as well. You're going to hear a lot about that tonight. Thank you. So I guess to answer your question is, family is the most important part of any human life.
Thank you. My last show and tell item for the culture I want my kids to raise their kids is not as cool as Sarah and Shawan's. It's just Play-Doh. And it goes along with that idea of that sense of play. And also, I just want them to feel like they have options to mold their life into whatever they want it to be. And as we go further into talking about our parents and families, there were times, I think, in my family's history where that wasn't really an option. And it was just like, this is what you have to do. And I think part of the beauty of the lessons I learned from my parents and what I can pass on to my kids is that they have choices, that they can play, that they have the freedom to make their life what they want it to be, and to celebrate our culture how they want to celebrate it. So in talking about culture, as Sarah brought up food, and food plays a role in the best we could do, whether you've read it or not. It's mentioned in different ways throughout the book. And I just want to talk about food, and I want to start with Sarah because I love talking about food with Sarah. But I wanted to know what role food does play in your culture, and if you have a cultural memory associated with food.
Gosh, there's so much to talk about food, not only because it's like there's so much good food in Malaysia, and I love cooking, by the way, cooking and baking. And my name's Sarah Lee. That's the running joke for a long time, like the bakery and the goods, and not the same spelling. But anywho, from a cultural tradition perspective, you know, my mom and just pretty much the community I grew up with, they were always asking me, like, have you eaten? Why haven't you eaten? Have you had food? If you haven't, you've had food, eat more. You know, every household I've ever been to, they would be constantly feeding me food, even though if I've already had lunch, because Malaysia is big on food where we have like 5 meals a day, you know, or maybe more than that. There was someone jokingly compared us to a Hobbit. So for those who are familiar with Lord of the Rings, hobbits have like 11 Z's and second dinners and lunches. It sounded like how Malaysian eating habits were. So it was interesting to think about, just reflecting on this question, what were some of my, how did food play a role? And my mom became a stay-at-home mom when I was born. So I have 2 older siblings, like I mentioned earlier. And cooking for the family, we had family dinner every single night, except for the nights when she said, I'm not cooking, I'm tired. So we would have Pizza Hut. You know, Pizza Hut also exists in Malaysia, but that was what our go-to for when we knew mom wasn't cooking. So that was a special treat. But yeah, no, mom would always cook a soup for my sister who loves soup. My brother always loved the meaty and heartier dishes. He was similar like my brother. And then for me, I love fried fish. I remember she used to have this little bowl with fried fish and rice. Rice was a staple. My dad was the kind of person who couldn't go without a bowl of rice for every single meal. If he didn't have a bowl of rice, he wasn't full. And there's some traditions behind that too. I think at least from his lived experience, they grew up really poor. And what they could afford was usually a bag of rice, and it's always very little. And it was such a luxury to have rice. And he grew up in a family of 4 siblings, and he was the oldest. So that means he would always have to forego his portion so that his younger siblings could eat. So there was a lot that my father taught me about food, where you eat what's been given to you, you don't be picky. And you know, if you don't eat now, you'll eat it later. It was one of the old classic things. But other than that, you know, my dad loved feeding all of us, like making sure we were well fed with food. One of my favorite dishes is Nasi Lemak, which loosely translates into fatty rice, but that's a Malaysian delicacy and dish. It's basically rice with different like curries and cucumbers and a fried egg, and sometimes comes served with fried chicken. And he used to buy that for me as I was growing up for breakfast. And I remember getting caught once because as I was going to college, I would eat out all the time when I go to college, and I wasn't coming home and eating breakfast nor lunch anymore. So I remember like throwing that out into the trash, and my mom was so pissed that I threw it out that she tracked me down and said, why did you throw this out? If you're not going to eat it, tell us, or else, you know, you're going to hurt your father's feelings. So from then on, I got scared. I started eating the Nasi Lemak every time that was available. And also later, I finally found the guts to tell my dad, like, hey, thanks, Dad, for buying this, but I'm in college right now and I already eat at college. And I think it's because my mom planted the seed as well. Like, hey, you need to stop like buying this for Sarah because she's not going to eat it all the time. She's got her own life going on right now. So let her be. So thankfully for that, because I don't know if I had the courage to tell my dad at the time, you know, if, you know, I don't want to eat it anymore. But those are the memories I hang on to in terms of like the memory of my dad, even more so now since he passed away 2 years ago. Just all the different food items he used to get for us. So I'll pause there and pass it on to Xiaoan or Jen to talk more about food.
Yeah, wow. I guess I really relate everything you just shared, Sarah. The good memory about food with family, it can be traced easily back all the way to 1960s. So I had 4 older brothers, but the first 2 died because of poverty in 1960s. So that was very devastating, of course, on my mom. And so when I was born in the ends of the kind of the tail end of the Cultural Revolution, and then didn't have much to eat. So food was something treasure to have, rare to have, particularly food with quantity. I only get to experience, consume during very special occasions. I'm trying to remember from the very first time that I get to drink pop soda is during the Chinese New Year Eve. That's the only time once a year that kind of Christmas, right? You've been waiting for the whole year, just able to have something very nice. And I remember my dad, similar to your situation, Sarah, he would wait all the way till Friday afternoon when the butcher, they would sell the good parts of the pork. And then they normally save just bones. They can just get rid of the bones for a penny. Then my dad would wait until late in the evening when the butcher are ready to leave. And then my dad would cook all the bones, just kept boiling the bones. Because when he had me, he was in his 40s already. And I grew up with not necessarily the best physical conditions. And that was the best he could possibly do for me. The assumption was drinking the spoiled bone soup would help me with my calcium, building up calcium and all those things. Poverty defined my childhood. Now, when I look back, that it's all a blessing. And it's a blessing that in my prayer, I became a Christian after I came to the United States after a series of life events, chose to believe in God. Then I would have this dinner prayer, really thank God for the food that is on the table right now. And because of that experience, I've been teaching my children to say, similar to Sarah's situation, everything we call that's God's grace. It's given freely from God. So cherish them. And because not everybody is able to have that kind of blessing, I think because of the rarity, scarcity of food, so every time when we do get to cook together, that's an important family time. It's part of the ritual. I think in this case, I guess I'm supposed to share my favorite food in the world. One quick story. I guess when I was in my middle school, really kind of puberty, growing up as a boy, I would constantly hungry. I was hungry all the time. I'm an athlete and all that. Then my dad one time he bought, who knows where he got them. He got some because I live on the river, and he got some nice baby fish, very tiny baby shrimp, and he cooked. I just loved it so much. I don't necessarily know why. I never taste something so delicious. Then I just kept eating. I should have been more mindful, I guess, but I ate up all the rice. And I also ate up all the baby shrimps. And my dad even counted, Shawan, you just had 8 bowls of rice. And what happened then is I could not even stand up. And my tummy was so full, I couldn't stand up and walk. I ended up having pain. But that's one of the best moments that I had with my father because of the food he cooked. Yeah. Thank you for that powerful question, Jen.
I think rice is a common theme in my own cultural memories that are associated with food. And I wanted to, we're not doing show and tell, but I'll show you a page from the Cora Cook's Pancit book, because there are 3 dishes that she talks about making in the book. It's lumpia, which are kind of like egg rolls, adobo, which is a salted pork or chicken, and then pancit is a noodle dish. And those are the dishes that my mom would make for big celebrations. And when I turned 18, I remember I called her, and I was in college, and I said, well, I want to make adobo. Can you tell me the recipe so I can write it down? And she was like, she just said, well, you just do a pinch of this, or a dash of this. And I remember just being like, okay. So I had to learn from her and just watch her and learn how to make those dishes. So it's not written anywhere. It's in my head now too. And I think that's really cool. We also had rice every day. It was in the rice cooker on our kitchen counter. And I remember as I grew older, when I met my husband, Nate, who's white, in college, and we were living together, and I had the rice cooker on the counter, and he kept putting the rice in the fridge. And I was like, what are you doing? Like, it can just stay out all day. And he said, no, it can't. And I said, well, I'm fine. My stomach's fine. And that's how we were raised. We had this big machine that I remember. It was this big plastic box, and it had buttons 1, 2, and 3, and you would press it for as much rice as you wanted. And just a memory that kind of sticks with me, and it reminds me of like how my mom was raised was once we had our rice, and I was trying to make it, and I put it in the rice cooker, and our rice was full of maggots. And I remember thinking like, well, I have to throw this away. Like, and I was scared because we didn't waste anything at our house. We didn't have a lot of money. We had, and I still do it now. You just like always buy food when it's on sale and you keep it in your cupboard. Like, I don't need to do that now, but I still do it. And I remember when I saw the maggots, I showed my mom, and I was like, we just have to throw this away. And I'm sorry. I don't know how that happened. And she said, no, you don't. And she put it on a cookie sheet and put it in the oven, and we baked it until all the maggots came to the top, and we skimmed them off, and then we used the rice. And that's the situation growing up where it's hard still to get out of the mindset of like, I could throw something away, or I could waste it now if I wanted, because I'm in a situation in my life where that can happen. But it's still hard to do, coming from a background where you really couldn't waste anything, because that rice was expensive. It's that Jasmine Rose rice that comes in the big bag if you go to Pacific Rim. That's the expensive kind of rice. And I still remember that, even though I could buy a bag now and not worry about it. It's something that I remember, and that's a memory that sticks with me. For sure. But yeah, it was, and I still eat rice. So I don't really tell that story a lot, and I don't mind telling it, but sometimes when I tell people like, and you can still eat rice, it's like, yeah, it's in my DNA. I need it. I have to have it at least a couple times a week. It's always on our countertop. Speaking of our parents, because we've all been doing that quite a bit. A lot of the book talks about survival, and it's a lot of like from things that our parents had to go through to get us to where we are and what we are trying to do for our own futures. And I think my next question, and either Shawan or Sarah, you can start, but it's lessons. What lessons did you learn from your parents, and what were their hopes for you?
I guess I can begin this time, Sarah, to make it fair. My parents taught me so much. I mentioned a few things that how the care, the love they provided. My parents are unlike myself. I have an ongoing personality. I'm an educator. I'm a researcher. The way that I raise my children, maybe I even talk a little too much. But my parents, they basically embodied the most important values they believed in. and be there as a model. Like, for example, I'm watching my daddy, the timing he get to buy those bones, for example, right? And he's in Chinese culture, being reserved instead of be articulate is valued traditionally. And it's the action that made the difference, not the verbal. That's very much a Confucius believing. So I guess the lesson I learned from them is just to love someone unconditionally through actions in silence. That's been teaching me, helped me how to become a parent of two children in such a surreal time, in such a sometimes confusing time. It's constantly bring them in the family situation, knowing that they are loved and cared unconditionally. That's number one. The second one, I guess, is really just give them the sense of hope. Life never been easy anyway. Suffering are a shared human experience, but they don't define us. What really defines us is the resilience that is grounded and based on hope and love, that you just always and constantly coming back. I guess otherwise, what else can we do, right? I guess the third one is the hope is coming into the belief, the vision that we as human, we can do better things, we can do great things together. Let me tell you a quick story about what I mean by that. I was materially very poor, raised up that, but because of the love from my parents and grandparents, I always feel safe, I always feel cared. The best thing my father did for me was teach me how to read. There's a very tiny library, the smallest library in the world. Trust me, Karen, I know you work for Kalamazoo Public Library. I envy you for the beautiful buildings and the tremendous connection you have. But I grew up, I have the tiniest library in the whole world. But however, there was some fantastic classic American literature, authors and books. I grew up reading, Emily Dickinson, T.S. Eliot, and Toni Morrison. Those, it's through such the seeds well planted. I thank my dad for making that connection, so I get to spend a lot of time in the library. I'm trying to teach my children how to become a better reader. Because if you look externally out there to the world, you only see signs of sometimes disparity, confusion, but there's so much that is so rich in our interior life through reading to understand human nature, how we get along for the past 1,000 years, right? So much that is there. So I'd like to hear from Sarah.
Gosh, I sometimes use this comparison. We are sometimes the products of our parents' lived experiences. My dad, I mentioned earlier, grew up in poverty. His dad died when he was 7, and he had 3 younger siblings to take care of in addition to his mom. And a lot of his story and his family story is still a mystery to me. I know some of it, not all of it, because he didn't grow up, well-to-do and did some things that weren't necessarily great. Like, I hear all these whispers and stories about my dad used to tell me this one random story, and I can't confirm or deny it because he's not here to tell me the truth, right? He'll tell me things like, oh yeah, we used to go to this boys' school over here and then beat up the kids and then come back like during recess. I'm like, what? You did what? And then another time I'll hear another story like, my dad used to be part of a band and he played the guitar. And I was like, you were in a band, Dad? Like how, when, who else was part of this? And then recently I heard he had a best friend in school, like from like secondary school growing up. I didn't know he had a best friend. That's how much I know about my dad. But the little things that I do know about him makes me sometimes question the lessons I'm learning. Like, for example, never losing your temper. in public. Or in any situation, never lose your temper, because it's better to lie than to lose your temper in public, or to anyone in any situation, just because it's just, what do you call it? Face-saving initiatives, and just, I don't know how else to best describe it, but for some, this might be familiar. For some, it might be this foreign concept, but no, my dad was big on like never losing your temper, even though he lost his temper at home a lot. Especially when I was growing up. When I was a teenager, I used to come home late. My curfew was usually like 11. I would come home at midnight. And my mom would get really angry at me and would yell at me and say things that are highly inappropriate that you shouldn't hear as a teenager. But she was also going through different things in her life. And the lesson I learned from that was just don't lose your temper, which is so weird because I'm questioning that lesson today of like, it makes me think about like how sometimes I'm conflict avoidant, and sometimes I, would value like avoiding situations than to have to deal with them and express them. So that's why I admire like Shawan and Jen. They express themselves so much better than I do about how they feel in their stories. Sometimes I feel like I don't know how to tell my own story yet, which is some of the challenges growing up as a third generation Malaysian and then first generation immigrant here. Is I don't have a typical immigrant story that had to flee a country or leave because of poverty. I grew up like in a middle class family, and some of the things I learned were from times of wealth where my family could afford me to go overseas and as and come to the United States to get a degree. I went to Western Michigan University. In Malaysia, that's prized. Like if you have a degree from the United Kingdom, United States, or Australia, you're more than likely to get paid double if you work in Malaysia. So there's this weird layer of like what's considered good in Malaysia that makes it very complex about why certain things I've learned over time are valued. Is because they wanted a better future for me, assuming if it was in Malaysia, that you have to go overseas, you have to do these things, you need to not lose your temper because that's how people treat each other. This is how good relationships are like. But I learned that sometimes that doesn't always work. You end up hurting people and you hurt yourself along the way. So this is the lessons I've learned from them. But as I'm growing up as a Sarah Lee here in Kalamazoo, I'm learning that I sometimes need to question them, but more of like create space for them in a different way, and how I want to grow up to be a different, the person that I really want to be, the better version of myself. So I know that's a very long roundabout way of describing like lessons, but I'll pass to Jen.
Thank you. It's so special to hear from both of you on things that you learned from your parents. I think the lessons that I learned from my parents were unwritten, very unwritten. And it's mostly lessons that I learned from my mom. And I think sometimes we see those shows like 90 Day Fiance, and it's something you could laugh at, or you think about how Asian women are fetishized and what that looks like. And, the way my parents came together was a result of those things. But it was in the 80s. So it was a lot different than now, where you can go to the internet and kind of see what's happening. My mom's parents and family and older siblings, she was one of 13. Like I said, raised in a mountain province in the Philippines. Was made to marry my dad, didn't know him. He was much older than her. She was only 22, and come to a country that she, I don't even know if she was really interested in coming here. And that's how I came to be, right? So the biggest lesson I could learn from her was around resilience. And it's nothing that she would ever talk about. If she knew this was being recorded, she would be horrified. And if she knew I was talking about it, she would be horrified. So I was a little apprehensive about the recording, but it's something that I think about in the lesson I learned from her. In in figuring out how to be resilient and figuring out how to get through something hard. There's so much gratitude I have for her in raising my siblings and I have 3 siblings too, so there were 4 of us. For a family that you didn't know you would even have to have, right? Like, and there's so many things that come along with that. So I think a lesson that I learned from her was around survival and resilience. And I can't ever thank her enough for having me. Like, how do you even do that? You know, I think my parents' hopes for me were all around just having an education. So they, you know, that's all they could say. My mom went to college in the Philippines, but when she came here, her degree wasn't honored. So, you know, she worked retail jobs. My dad didn't go to college. So I think that's what they wanted. Like, go to college, figure out how to do that. And I did it on my own and figured out how to get through on my own with those lessons that she taught me about resilience and how to just survive something hard. And I think that, you know, I can't talk to my dad about hopes for me because he, like Sarah's dad, has passed away. He passed away when I was a lot younger, when I was 18. And my mom, I was thinking about memoirs and oral history and all the things that come out of this book. And I want to record her story and hold it and share it. And I also don't want to bring up the trauma for her of the things that she had gone through. And I think that's why a lot of what happens in the book, The Best We Could Do, means a lot, because the author was able to sit down with her parents and collect a story and tell it. And I think my parents' hopes for me were that I would have choices, and they saw education as the way to do that. And I did follow everything that they hoped that I could do, even though I can't really talk about it in depth with my mom, and I'm not able to talk about it with my dad. So yeah, I think that, you know, if you were to ask our parents when we were babies, each of us, Shawan and Sarah and I, what they wanted for us, they'd probably say the same things that we say about our families and our hopes for the future. But life plays out a lot differently in a lot of ways over time. So I think that leads me to just one more question, and I'm going to take it from a quote from The Best We Could Do. And again, if you haven't read it, you should check it out. But the author, T. Bui, says, "How much of me is my own and how much is stamped into my blood and bone and predestined?" And there's a lot about intergenerational trauma that comes up in the book. But I think I just wanted to leave us with what challenges us when it comes to our identities and our culture and our backgrounds and our history and all of that. So what challenges us? And then also, what gives you hope?
I'll go first, Sean. You don't have to go first this time. What challenges me? I'm learning to tell my story. I think that's a theme that I was mentioning earlier, because I spend so much time holding other people's story, more specifically like my mother. You know, we talk about the stories we hear from our parents. My mom has, her love language is telling a lot of stories about the past and relationships and just repeating those stories to the point where I have memorized every single childhood story she's ever told about her childhood. And I'm a keeper of those stories to the point where I get confused whether is it guidance from my mother of how I should be, how I should grow up, how I should be as a woman in this community, in this world, how I should exist as Sarah Lee. I still question that, because some of those teachings that I've learned from my mom weren't always that great. I feel like they were just passed down trauma that she had as a child. I mean, you know, I guess a small snippet into that is my mom, when she was born, she was the 4th child and 4th daughter and they didn't want a daughter, they wanted a son. So when she was born, they gave her away to the servant to be raised. And that's a story she's told me ever since I understood what she was saying to me. So as young as 3 or 4, she's been telling me the story ever since then. And I continue to feel challenged by this story because everything she's ever taught me about how to have healthy relationships weren't that great because they were coming from her trauma and her experiences. For example, one thing I remember she drilled into me really like intentionally since I was young is to never trust your heart. Always trust your brain. Your brain will take you far. Never trust your heart. And here I am at, in my late 30s, trying to figure out how to trust my heart sometimes. And, and anything to do with feelings and things to do with like, connecting with people sometimes is really hard for me to the point where I don't know how to tell these stories about myself, my lived experiences, because it's so much easier to just be quiet and say nothing. So I'm at this point where I'm just learning about, embracing these challenges and then shifting them to how do I start embracing that. So what gives me hope is that I'm so grateful for the community here, especially the Asian Affinity Group, my coworkers and my husband's family and how they've surrounded me and all my good friends that I've met over the last 18 years here in Kalamazoo to help me figure out some of these things. I don't think I have all the answers yet. I'm still figuring it out. I think I might be still figuring it out next 30 years or so, but I'm glad I have a community that can support me through this process.
Wow. That's why you and I are friends, have been friends for years. Sarah, I love everything you just shared, talking about we are stories. We are story being, basically. To me, we are the sum of the stories that we believe and also the stories we reject. We can make it very simple, right? And we simply cannot incorporate any stories we have not heard into our worldview, can we? Which means the worldview is constantly changing by the stories that we heard from others. And that suggests the very important possibility and opportunity is how can we expose ourselves to more stories, as many as possible. And that's why I decided to come to the United States in the first place 20 years ago. I just feel through the reading, those beautiful ideals being clearly articulated in those, then I just don't feel my life will be complete without spending quality time on the end of the globe, as simple as that. Because we make assumptions about others, and a lot of times the perceptions can be just wrong. And I'm grateful to all of you tonight, very sincerely, that you practice deep listening to the stories of someone as humble as Xiaoan from southern China, a small village, but you get to listen to my stories. I want to thank you for that. And also what I really learned is, and sometimes the story we surround our children, sometimes with dark and frightening, like Sarah just mentioned, or otherwise can be a choice. What kind of stories do we want to surround our children with? Can be light, can be fun. And I'm not suggesting we should beautify the reality. The reality is very suffering, but what the choice that we can make is plant the seeds of love and hope. I guess that's really the biggest lesson, because as go through our lives, the stories that we believe, the stories that we experiencing come back to haunt us. Very simple. They never leave. They shape who we, what we see and how we interact with others. They have the power to either close our heart or to open ours. In this case, I learned in my 40 years, I cannot escape the stories. And often I don't even know if I can question those stories. Yeah, I don't know if you can understand me, but I'm basically what I'm saying, I guess the hope is knowing that possibility of just basically coming together, practice deep listening to someone else's story. My favorite line nowadays is listen to someone, listen into the soul, the being of others. It's the basic, the least, and the best we can do for another human being. Just listening. I want to thank you for that tonight, Jen, and all of you. Back to you, Jen.
And Shawan, it's always hard to follow you when we're talking. I wish we were together with some snacks and beverages instead of on Zoom. I think when I think about what challenges me and what gives me hope, I still struggle with what it means to what femininity is, and the cultural expectations of that, and what it means. My husband and I have been together for 20 years, which is a long time, and we met when we were young. And I remember we moved in together when we were very young. I was 20. And when we moved in together, I said, I'm not doing anything for you ever, because my mom did all the cooking, all the cleaning. She did everything. I will never do anything for you. So I just want you to know that. And I remember being challenged by that and constantly having to relook at what that meant, because that's not fair to another person that you're in a partnership with, to say that you're never going to do that. But I went so far from the way that I was raised. I tried to go the complete opposite way, right? And that wasn't right in so many ways. And it really is something that has challenged me always for 20 years. And, our oldest is 5, and becoming a mother with the family history that we have, it was a whole other group of challenges when it comes to femininity and gender roles and gender and what that means, and just constant questions that I think I'll always struggle with in some way. Even though what gives me hope is therapy and being able to talk through. There's so much in my mom's culture that was passed to us where you don't talk about it. Don't talk about it. You can kind of talk about it with each other, maybe a little bit, but don't talk about it. And I think that what gives me hope is working through what that generational trauma does to families, and thinking about that and talking about it with my siblings, and just being very open to talk about it. And in therapy or with others, I think that's what gives me hope, is figuring out how to work it out, so that my kids, they'll have other struggles, but they won't struggle with the same types of things that I struggle with. And that's my plug for therapy as we get to the end of this. But that's definitely something that gives me hope, is going back to how Shawan so beautifully put it, really listening and deeply listening to other stories and honoring that. And I want to thank everyone for listening to us tonight in our conversation. Shawan and Sarah, thank you so much. I always enjoy talking with you two. And we did it in front of a lot of people today, but I just enjoy having these opportunities to listen to your stories. So thank you so much.
Well, I echo that. Thanks to all 3 of you for sharing so much and for doing it in such a touching way. Each of you has stories that I think touched all of us. And so we're grateful to you for doing that.